our meeting started. And again, I do apologize for those of you that are in the back still patiently waiting for a chair. They will get those out to you shortly. So first, I just want to start by welcoming all of you and saying cheers to 2023. And if I could please ask Ross Liscombe to stand and start us with the Pledge of Allegiance. And our flag is over here, to my right.
Our left. To the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So our first order of business this morning is the approval from our membership for the 2023 roster of board members and advisory council. And I just do want to submit before we get a motion and an approval of the rosters that are on your tables, we still do have spots available on the advisory council, so if any of you here this morning are interested in learning more and becoming more involved in the leadership role of the Sonoma County Alliance, please feel free to reach out to myself, Janet, any of our board members, and we can get you the information. We certainly welcome additional participation and advice from our advisory council, and we welcome you to participate on the leadership role of the Sonoma County Alliance. So again, there's roster in the middle of your tables, and if I could please just get a motion from the floor to approve the roster. Danny Sheehan, Janet, are you taking notes? Moved it?
Second.
And then who's second? Okay, I've got oh, Mike Martini. I heard that one first. Mike Martini, back second. Any discussion? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Our new roster passes unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate that. So my last official duty for our meeting this morning is I just want to share some remarks with all of you. And last year, when I stood before you at the beginning of our 2022 presidency, I told all of you that my one word for 2022 was opportunity. Opportunity quickly became defined as many things, but having the opportunity to serve the Alliance as your president this past year has truly been an honor for me. I was very nervous coming into this role, following the footsteps of Marlene and the leadership she demonstrated over the previous 18 months, leading our organization. We had a few setbacks in the first half of the year. However, it allowed us the opportunity as an organization to continue to come together as we have in previous years and ended 2022 as a successful year despite the few setbacks that we had. We had some great accomplishments this past year, and I'd like to take a few minutes to acknowledge and highlight a few things. First, I could not have gotten to the end of this past year without the hard work of our executive officers, the board, and the advisory council. I can't begin to thank each of them enough for the guidance and encouragement they have given to me over the past 12 months. I'm so impressed and grateful to each of them for the dedication they continue to demonstrate by showing up and doing the work that is needed to benefit our community. I want to especially thank Janet Connors, Marlene Soyland, Ryan Kelly, Paul Yeomans, Scott Kincaid, and Brian Ling for your endless hours of work and support you've given to me personally and to the Alliance. And to our membership. We could not do all of this without all of you here in the room. Now that we're meeting back in person again and continue to watch our GMM membership and attendance growing each month, I feel so confident that we are on track to getting back to the 150 attendees mark in 2023. That's a huge accomplishment considering we were lucky to have 30 people in the room immediately following the COVID shutdown. When we opened back up, it was a very limited number of people in here. This morning we're setting up extra tables. Robert, you might have had something to do with that. The Small Business Grant Program has been a huge success in its first year, and I thank Marlene Soyland for her continued leadership and guidance in seeing this program continue to grow. Brian and Allie have grown the membership committee, and I couldn't be more grateful for the work that is being done to retain and gain new members. They have set their priorities in a very defined outline. We'll do this another way. In a very defined outline, and are making things happen. With the addition of our new membership and events director, I'm so confident that we'll see continued growth for the Sonoma County Alliance. Last year, we started a new programs committee, and I want to thank Tiffany Montgomery and Keith Woods for their work in orchestrating some great programs this past year, and look forward to more innovative ideas and programs in the coming year. Much gratitude to Dick Dowd and Marlene Soyland. Marlene pops up here a lot. For stepping up to the plate and creating our newest committee, the Water Supply Committee, that will focus on water issues we are faced with in Sonoma County. This is what the Alliance was framed around over 40 years ago, and we are coming full circle, and I thank both Dick and Marlene for their leadership in this new committee. Communications Committee co-chairs Steve Knudsen and Katie Hillmeyer have begun revamping our Communications Committee, and we've already seen updates to our website, which was much needed. We're seeing a lot more on social media and a few new blog posts. I'm thrilled to see this continue to evolve in 2023 with the help and guidance of ideas coming from our new membership and events director as well. Mick Menendez and Jason Lee, thank you for your continued leadership with our Education Committee. I'm so proud that the Alliance helped to fund a new book vending machine for Lincoln Elementary School, a school in which 95% of the children receive subsidized lunches. This was a need in our community that I'm so thrilled and proud that the Sonoma County Alliance was able to fulfill in 2022. Ross Liscombe, thank you for your ongoing work that you have done with our law enforcement and seeing through our community engagement and rewards program. The gun buyback program was a huge success, and I loved how you got the Sonoma County Alliance membership engaged in this program. We continue to see our name in the press with rewards being offered, and appreciate you making sure this program stays viable. Our DEI committee co-chairs Janet Connor and Gina Lisa Tamayo have worked tirelessly over the past few years in providing education, awareness, and engagement with community leaders in the DEI space. We still have more work and education ahead of us. However, we are putting action into our commitments, and I applaud our leadership and our Alliance members that have been supportive of our work in this area. Janet continues to set meetings to keep our engagement active in a variety of ways throughout the community. She's been so proactive, and people are taking notice that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. SCAPAC, special thanks to Scott Kincaid for his unwavering work and dedication, not only to SCAPAC and all of the advocacy that goes along with chairing this committee, but everything else he does for the Alliance. This past year, Scott has made himself available to me day, night, weekends, etc., and has been a voice of reason, supportive, and shows up every time without an ounce of reservation or complaint. In addition to all of his responsibilities with SCAPAC, he continues to take responsibility for our Finance Committee, worked with me and the others on the hiring task force, has actively participated in all officer responsibilities, although technically he wasn't one. He just never said no every time I included him in an email, a meeting, a phone call, a Zoom. He just showed up because I asked and did the work that needed to be done. As most of you know, Brian Ling stepped away from his role as Executive Director for the Alliance at the beginning of 2022. After working for us for almost 10 years, he came to the officers towards the end of 2021 and let us know of his plans to pursue another career. As excited as we were for him to be able to follow a dream, we weren't eager to see him go. His departure was delayed for a few months because we couldn't find a replacement, and then when we did, he agreed to stay on for training and transition period. Unfortunately, that didn't work out with the person we hired, so we had to start all over again. Brian came to our aid and agreed to continue to help us with the administration of the Alliance until we could find another replacement. Then when we found that person, Brian helped us with the transition, and he also became an official member of the Alliance and will continue to serve as a volunteer on a few of our committees. Brian, thank you very much for all you have done for the Alliance and for the community. So this year we accomplished quite a bit. We've launched our small business grant program. We've contributed to vulnerable children in our community. We've grown our membership and attendance at our monthly GMMs. We've grown our awareness of education with DEI. We've had success in our local elections with our skate pack endorsements. We have a seat at the table concerning the water supply issues we face as a community, and we continue to bring awareness and education to our members about a variety of issues facing Sonoma County. One of our greatest accomplishments comes from ending the year with hiring of Ty Mooney, our membership and events director. Ty has been a bright light to this crazy year, and I'm so honored to have her on the Sonoma County Alliance team and to be able to work side by side with her and continue our work in 2023. Last, but definitely not least, I want to thank my company, Fidelity National Title, and Jennifer Hall, our president, for allowing me the time away from work this past year to serve as your president. I could not have dedicated the time and resources to the Alliance if it were not for her support. So a huge thank you, Jen, and a Fidelity National Title. So with that, I would like to invite Janet Connors to the podium to officially hand over the role of 2023 President of the Sonoma County Alliance. Thank you, everyone.
So Kimberly, where do I even begin to thank you? You have been an amazing leader for the Alliance. We were smart and lucky to put you in the seat for 2022. And your ability to dig in, your knowledge, your compassion, your smile, your time, your patience and leadership were essential to getting us to this moment in 2023. You have clearly set a perfect table for us to launch in 2023. The board and advisory council wanted to show our appreciation and desire for you to relax and take some time to chill. So to encourage that, we have a gift certificate for you to the spa at the Vintners Inn, and we have a lovely, gigantic wind chime for your pool and garden area while you're out there relaxing and chilling. So.
You gotta do it on a weekend.
Well, thank you. So those are big shoes to fill, Kimberly's and Marlene's. But I am honored and humbled to have your vote of confidence and your support. I'm thrilled to be here today and serving as the 2023 president. I've been a member of the Alliance for about 20 years. Scott Kincaid got me involved back in our early days of banking. And for the last 3 years, as Kimberly mentioned, I've served as the co-chair of your DEI committee. I have the utmost respect for this organization and the people in this room.
Right?
It's not me. Okay, we'll just give them a minute. My top 3 Sonoma County Alliance out of my top 10 list. The reasons that I come here every month and have been for the last 20 years is that I learn something at every meeting. I interact with persons that I may not always agree with. And the number one is that each and every one of us is here because we care deeply about the success of Sonoma County. And I love that. So our focus for 2023 is to continue the great work that Kimberly and her team did for 2022. Excuse me. We want to continue to diversify our membership. We want to continue to diversify the voices at our table and produce programs and events that are impactful and meaningful for our members. This is your Sonoma County Alliance. Please let us know how we are doing, how we can make improvements. If you're a member and you want to get more involved, join a committee. Ty will talk about that later. If you're not a member, become a member and bring your voice to the table. Thank you. So I want to thank Don Mills and Sound Ideas for providing our video recording of today's meeting. I want to thank Jeremy Olson for all the work that he did in updating our bylaws along with Kimberly They had been overdue for quite a while. And then I also wanted to thank Scott Omerod for preparing and compiling our member survey. I also wanted to mention that last month we introduced you to 2 of the 5 small business grant recipients of our 2022 Sonoma County Alliance Small Business Grant Program, Roberta Ryan and Joe Nish. Please consider making a donation for the 2023 program so that we can continue our support of small businesses in Sonoma County. You can do that by going to our website, or you can talk to Marin Soyland today, she's here today. And then along those same lines, Ross Liscombe has a related announcement to one of our grant recipients last month, Joe Nish.
Sure, thank you. Joe made his presentation last month on his invention, which was a temple massager. And it's gotten resounding acceptance from law enforcement, veterans, and different school districts. Our chief heard the presentation and he decided to buy 260 of them for the Santa Rosa Police Department. So what I'm asking is, if you'd like to help offset his personal funds, because the city manager doesn't know he did this, and you'd like to make a contribution, you can make a check out to Santa Rosa Police Foundation. Call me and I'll come and pick it up. Any amount between $5 and $500 would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. And now I would like to ask Ty Mooney, our Director of Membership and Events, to come up and give you her report.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Kimberly. Spectacular job on both ends. So, quick update here. We have our calendar up on our website. For those of you who are not active on our membership portal, please become active. If you're locked out, please let me know and I'll help you get back in. The calendar is updated with 2023 events. The hottest ones up and coming here. We got the February 1st GMM. This is with our very own Ryan Kelly hosting a post-pandemic marketing seminar. We've also got our first Biz and Fizz networking happy hour, which thank you to Don Mills. We will be hosting it in Windsor at Cuvée. 4:30, that is February 23rd. This is in response to the membership survey, which I'll briefly touch on, where you all mentioned you wanted some time to network. So this is it, over drinks. And then we have our legislative reception set for March 23rd, and of course our golf tournament upcoming May 4th. Those details will be added to the calendar as we move forward. And of course, if you're subscribed to the newsletter and actually read through them, you will see I am noting about them every time. Big did you know, as we sit in this very full room, which I'm so happy to see, there's ways to pre-register an RSVP, and this will allow us to make sure all the tables are set. You could pay $35 by credit card before the meeting on our website portal, and that will let us know you're coming. And also $350 could be invoiced, and that will cover the entire year, and you don't have to deal with it at all. If you do that option, please let us know you're coming each time to make sure you have a name tag and that we're prepared for you. This would make my life really easy, and I'd be so grateful. All right, so the fun stuff. Our membership survey came out. If you didn't get a chance to fill it out, don't worry. We do have other opportunities this year. I think between Jen and I, this is going to be the year of surveys, so get ready. Our big goal is to hear all of your voices and make sure that we're providing a service that's really relevant to what you want to do and what you want to accomplish this year. So of the survey, some of the highlights included our hottest topic for this year, according to all of you, is environmental, and especially when it pertains to water. So we'll be working really closely with that committee to make sure that we can offer some programs that are relevant to that topic. Another hot topic that I saw was leadership development and crime prevention. So we're looking into those as well. If you guys have any ideas or speakers that you want to suggest, feel free to email me, and we'll be happy to start a conversation about that. My favorite one was 41% of the members taking the survey are not a part of a committee, yet 61% would like to be. So my biggest goal is I would love to see everyone in our membership be a part of a committee. There is a committee for everyone, and if you don't see one on there for you, I'm happy to start one with you. We want everyone to be heard, and the committees are what drive the important work that we do here, so joining one of those is pertinent to making your voice heard here. And on that note, if you really want to get to know me, we have a communications and marketing chair that's open. So if you would like to fill that spot, we really would love to see someone there. It is huge for retention and recruitment. So if you have a keen eye for communications and marketing, let me know. I'll even take you to lunch if you join. And then, of course, a quick reminder that there are so many ways to get involved. If you look around in this room, we have elected officials, we have business owners, small and large, we have leadership from nonprofits, and these are just a small portion and survey of the group here. It is so important to have your business be recognized, just like Joe Misch did, and got some clientele from it, which is wonderful. So make sure you join as a breakfast sponsor or a pop-up sponsor. That will allow you to have 3 minutes here at the podium, or a minute if you do the pop-up sponsor, with other benefits included. Big thanks to CTE, our sponsor for February. So thank you so much for that, and I think that wraps it up. Oh, thank you to our new renewing members. Can we give them a round of applause? We're so glad you're here. All right, that was the quickest update because I want to save time for Robert, because that's why we're all here. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Ty. So Kimberly, would you like to assist with our introduction of new members?
Yes, and we have a full room, so please just stand up, give us your name and your company, and we'll go around the room. I'm Kimberly Waite with Fidelity National Title.
Hi, Kevin Zuko, ZFA Structural Engineers.
Kevin C., Santa Rosa Junior College Wine Program.
Good morning, Dana Ghirardelli, Sonoma County Farm Bureau.
Good morning, Chris Turner, Golden State Lumber.
I am Chris Fiscalini of Umpqua Bank.
Good morning, Eric Schmees, Golden State Lumber.
Good morning, Howard Dalton.
Good morning, Paul Yeomans, Exchange Bank.
Good morning, Lori Rooney, North Good Biz Magazine.
You've already heard from me, Chad Mooney, Sonoma County Alliance.
Good morning, Mick Menendez, Pacific Advisors.
Conrad Fernandez, Fidelity National Title.
Jennifer Hall, Fidelity National Title.
And this morning's speaker, Dr. Robert Eyler, who will get a formal introduction in a few minutes.
Good morning, Joe Dietzen, West America Bank.
Tracy Emmerich, Fleet Solutions Group. Linda Bone, Summit State Bank.
Keith Becker, Pure Property Management.
Todd Mendoza, Coldwell Banker Realty.
Good morning, Ken LaFranchi, Architect. Brett Wilmes, Soil and Company.
Andre Moran, Rel Gene Race Consulting Engineers.
Good morning, Lisa Whitkey Schaffner, North Coast Builders Exchange.
Jeff Riley, WRA Environmental Consultants. Pete Leskier Engineers, Civil Engineers and Surveyors.
Scott Kincaid, Facility Development Company.
Greg Hurd, BKF Engineers.
I'd like to introduce our newly elected assembly member, or assemblyman, Damon Conley. He's actually leaving here to go to Sacramento to get sworn in this morning. And Ross Wilson, Century 21 Epping.
Good morning, John Cregan, Santa Rosa Chief Police.
Artie Dexter, Leduc and Dexter Plumbing and Super Service.
Good morning, Gary Lentz, Lone Depot Home Mortgage.
Steve Burlebell, Friends of Smart.
Good morning, Doug Williams, retired.
Good morning, Matt Walsh with Edward Jones.
Good morning, Charlie Nichols of Trope Group.
Danny Sheen with Friends of Smart.
Joe Gaffney, St. Louis DePaul.
Michelle Boone, currently searching.
Mark Nelson, Mid-State Construction.
Carly Rodriguez, Mid-State Construction.
Good morning, Kim August, Summit State Bank.
Don Mills, Cuvert Belgium Brewery.
Brian Lang, Real Estate Services.
Laura Mettenstotter, 4C Sonoma.
Chuck Root, Double Eagle Financial, and also I would like to announce that Eddie's, no, okay.
Rob Sandville, KLH Consulting.
Steve Flake, Power Associates.
Dan Conrad, member of SCAPAC.
Scott Ormerod, Leap Solutions Group.
Tony Tosconi, Tosconi Event Management Solutions.
Mike Pickens, Operating Engineers, Local 3.
Al Lerma, Mitote Food Park and Impact Now Advisors.
Christopher Perez, owner of Core Electrical Services, board member of North Bay Black Chamber of Commerce, and a member of the 100 Black Men of Sonoma County.
Terry Gray, Core Electrical Services.
Carrie Chambers, Community First Credit Union.
Rick Carlisle, BKF Engineers.
Kurt Nichols, retired.
Good morning, Jason Lee from Sonoma County Office of Education. I have two guests with me today. First, I'll respect the elders, Braulio, sorry. Jack Pollard with Sonoma County Progressive Tribal Alliance. And this gentleman and I met in middle school. I was his principal, so I do look my age as to see. This is Braulio Olivares, not only a former student, but a recent SSU grad in marketing. So if you're looking for a bilingual marketing expert, here you go.
Good morning, Mike Martini, Taft Street Winery.
Good morning, Aaron Smith with Adobe Associates.
Ramsey Brown with Exchange Bank.
Morning, Seth Mays, GMH Builders.
Good morning, Chad Hansen, Exchange Bank.
Tony Spisman, 707 Promotions.
Jocelyn Henderson, Summit State Bank.
Joel Lorraine, Summit State Bank.
Patrick Holton, 707 Promotions.
Siobhan Griffin, Umpqua Bank.
Chad Barbieri, Exchange Bank.
Good morning, Katie Hillenmeyer, Providence Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital.
Bill Bolster, Electro-Optical Components and Rotary Club of Windsor.
Good morning, Ryan Bucksbaum, Next One Staffing.
Good morning, Corey McCormick, Holiday Construction.
Good morning, Melinda Rivera, Pacific Gas and Electric.
Good morning, David Hagley, Summit State Bank, and Vice Mayor in the City of Healdsburg.
Terry Fowler, Fowler Associates Real Estate.
Teresa Scott, Western Health Advantage.
Trish Griffiths with the Personnel Perspective HR Consultantships.
Marlene Soyland, Soyland Management Company.
Tom Hine, West County Pool and Spa Service.
Justin Hunter, Holly Construction.
Phoebe Ellis, Lace House Linen.
Happy New Year. Richard Marzo, Lace House Linen.
Sloan Shin, Pepperwood Preserve.
Good morning, Alliance. Jefferson Alvarez with WSI Smart Marketing.
Good morning, Stacy Powers from Exchange Bank.
Allie Spitzer, Exchange Bank.
Kristen Lohide, CTE Foundation.
Ryan Kelly, WSI Smart Marketing.
Good morning, Brian Toohey, Five Star Bank.
Morning, Barry Palma with Newmark Knight Frank Commercial Real Estate.
Dennis Harder, retired.
Good morning, Vanessa Maynard, Next One Staffing.
Brandon Jewell, CTE Foundation.
Mark Stapp, Sonoma State and Santa Rosa City Council.
And now I'd like to introduce.
Oh, wait, got one. Oh, already did. Oh, you did? Oh, sorry.
Doesn't get to it, but he didn't get sound.
I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Eyler has been a longtime friend of the Alliance, and he is here to share his economic forecast for 2023. Dr. Eyler is a professor of economics at Sonoma State University, where he's been teaching since 1995. He earned a BA in economics in Chico in 1992 and a PhD from Cal Davis in 1998. Dr. Eyler also served on the board of directors for Redwood Credit Union. He also acts as the interim associate vice president of government and regional relations at Sonoma State University as of June 2022. There's much more to say about Dr. Eyler. You can look it up online. I think we want to get him up here now. So please help me welcome Dr. Robert Eyler.
Good morning, folks. Let's get right into it. So what I want to do is I want to start with forecast. So my job today is to actually walk you through the macro side of it, take us down to the regional, and try to understand where we may be going in the next couple of years. In November 2022, the Federal Reserve asked 40 forecasters, these 40 people, all they do is watch what's going on in the macro economy. And they had this forecast to share. And you may or may not be able to see this, but I'm going to try to make it real plain for you in the sense that for the first 3 quarters of 2022, we saw 2 quarters of negative GDP growth after inflation. And then we had a 3rd quarter where we actually saw a pickup. So that actually helped forecast. And if you look at the annual forecasts there for real GDP through 2025, they actually picked up from the previous quarter. So every quarter the survey goes out to these 40 forecasters. The one that's shaded here in each one of these blocks is the latest forecast. The one next to it is the previous quarter's forecast. And for 2022, they picked it up. However, for 2023, they almost cut it in half in the 4th quarter of 2022. The rationale is, as we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, is that with interest rates rising as fast as they are, there has to be a price to pay. And so it's what we've been in the last 12 or 15 months is sort of this trade-off period where we've had relatively robust inflation based on a recovery from a major recession and the fiscal and monetary reactions we had to it as policymakers or through our policymakers in the United States. And now we're paying for that from higher interest rates, and ultimately we're going to pay for that with an increase in unemployment and a lower jobs growth rate. So part of that growth rate in 2023 is that we're going to suffer most of that pain this year. Now, from an unemployment standpoint, however, and this is the real conundrum that economists have faced over the last, let's say, 6 or 8 months, is how much will job losses take place as a reaction to higher interest rates and the slowing down of inflation? There's, in a sense, a natural relationship between unemployment and inflation. We call it the Phillips curve. There's another one that's between job openings and unemployment, which is known as the Beveridge curve, and there's curves galore. It's almost like driving on a windy road. The point is at the end of the day, we know there has to be this trade-off. It's natural in macroeconomics to get it. The trick is by how much. What magnitude of price are we going to pay for, in a sense, the choices we made in 2020 and 2021, and now we have to make in the last 2 years. Inflation, which I'll go into in a little bit more depth here in a minute, is currently slowing down. And we're seeing this actually worldwide. We've had some inflation data come out at the center of Europe. So France and Germany, they're seeing inflation actually slow a little bit, and energy prices have actually somewhat mitigated from their original growth. But we should not expect inflation to go away quickly. This is in a sense, and I'll talk about this later when I talk about wages in Sonoma County specifically, we've had an increase in the cost of doing business as a result of what happened in the pandemic time and its aftermath. In such a way, we have to expect some of those costs are going to linger. So no matter what we do with interest rates, no matter how much we see a change in the jobs market, we're going to have some embedded inflation. And the real puzzle for the Federal Reserve is how much of that lingers in such a way we have to think about lifting expectations. And when we lift expectations, we get a slower moving economy. And that's the real trick, is not now, but where we're going to be 5 years from now. And I'll talk about that as we go on through the next few minutes. Okay, so I gave you the bottom line here. Let's talk about jobs real quick. So one of the bright spots in the American economy has been jobs. This is the Great Recession. If we start both of the last 2 recessions at the same place, let's call it number 100. November 2007 was the beginning of the Great Recession. It took 78 months for the American economy to get to the same number of people working in the United States as we had in November 2007. Now in the pandemic time, this is what it looks like. And we just finally recovered the jobs we lost, thinking about, again, the aggregate number of people working in the United States. So when those jobs changes took place, you can see the sharp cut, and then we've been on the steady path. Basically, we crossed that red dotted line, and we got back to recovery about 4 months ago. But that steady growth rate has helped us move through the last couple of years and kind of gives us some hope that the recession that is coming, or one that we think is coming, is going to be relatively mild. Because the jobs market remains very, very frothy. And we just don't know where we're going to see major job losses take place. So this is actually pretty good news. The trick is we can't think about this as pure reality. There's some illusion here. And since we know job losses are going to take place, the depth and breadth are the key. Now, we think about that, we then want to talk about what's happening at an industrial level, and this is where we have some seeds of problems. So, and then we're going to see this again when we talk about California and when we talk about the United States in just a minute. What we're going to do now is I'm going to march you through the specific months from April 2020 forward, always looking back to January 2020 as a pre-pandemic benchmark. Every industry in the United States basically lost jobs the first 2 months after the pandemic shut down the economy, or we chose to shut the economy down as a result of the pandemic. By the end of 2020, we only had recovered jobs from before the pandemic in transportation and warehousing, which totally makes sense given the transition we made in the economy. Believe it or not, nationally speaking, through the end of 2021, we really only recovered in that industry again. So for about 20 months, we were under where we were before the pandemic in almost every industrial sector. And generally speaking, that is a rare occurrence in recession. By the end of 2022, which I'll zoom us to here, most of the industrial sectors of the national economy had recovered jobs, which is good. But there are some lingering problems. If you look left to right, this basically goes from goods-producing industries, construction, manufacturing, wholesale, which kind of lives on the edge between manufacturing and retail, and then a bunch of services jobs after that. Where you can see those deep cuts on the far right-hand side are primarily in 3 industries. One is hotels and motels, or places we stay overnight, which we kind of technically call accommodation. They were still about 16% down from where we were before the pandemic, seasonally adjusted. So we may see structural change in the way we staff those types of businesses, as well as in so-called leisure and hospitality jobs, thinking bars, restaurants, hotels, and event centers. So that's the second big cut there that's still lingering around, even though that has gotten a little bit closer to coming back to the original spot we were in January 2020, so about 3% down. But those are the kind of jobs that younger people, when they're transitioning either from high school or out of college waiting to work, they can get those jobs relatively easy because the entry cost is relatively straightforward. You don't need a lot of training to get in there. What's that mean for younger workers and the duration of unemployment that they face, both after they graduate from some school, whether it be high school or college, but really if they lose their job, those transition jobs may not be there. We'll come back and talk about that more regionally in just a minute. Let's now talk about inflation with a little bit more depth. So I gave you a very quick look at the next few years' forecast. And the supposition is that the higher interest rates we've seen in the United States and really the slowing down of the economy as a result should lead to lower inflation. The biggest puzzle that economists have faced in this recession, and the one that may be coming here this year, is how much of inflation is demand-driven and how much of it is supply-driven. And we've had a lot of up and down about how supply chains have been contracted, or let's say constricted, as a result of what happened with the pandemic and the pandemic shadow and supply chain movements. Now, we teach and we train and we do policy around monetary policy in the United States and really mostly in the emerged world worldwide through thinking demand is the driver of inflation. So if we increase interest rates, we basically suppress demand, we suppress inflation, we pay for that penalty through a slower growth rate and ultimately through job loss. We think that those levers are very available to us. If inflation is primarily supply-driven, we do not have levers to easily pull. And in fact, higher interest rates can exacerbate some of the innovations that might take place to unconstrict, if you will, or reopen those supply chain networks that have been somewhat closed. So we're watching that balancing act take place worldwide, and you're still seeing some of the shadow effects where now China is just finally opening up. The geopolitical issues in Eastern Europe have exacerbated some of those supply chain issues, especially in energy markets, and how that ultimately reverberates over the water to the United States and kind of lingers in the background is still an unknown. So we're watching closely what happens with inflation from both sides, but what these data are is the data that the Federal Reserve is watching directly when they make interest rate decisions in the United States. It's called core personal consumption expenditures prices. Now that's a gigantic mouthful for basically the following. Every month you buy a basket full of goods. Okay, everything you buy is in that shopping cart. Okay, how much that price changed from 12 months ago is what these data are outside of food and energy. So I take food and energy products out of that shopping cart, and this is the evolution of those prices. This is from 2007 forward. So you can see both the Great Recession and the pandemic recession here. You can see that really prices lingered below this blue dotted line, which you may just be able to pick out at the very bottom of this graph. But that blue dotted line is at 2% for a reason. I'll come back to that in a minute. We did a great job of controlling inflation in the 2010s, and then about April, May 2021, we saw inflation take off. So it peaked around, let's say, about 5.5% in the United States, at least according to these data here. And when it peaked, it basically coincided with the Federal Reserve becoming very aggressive on interest rates. So supply chains, manufacturers, construction, all kind of saw this coming, and everything started to slow down a little bit, and this has started the slowdown in prices. But we are still lingering at relatively high levels, and so it's hard to get some perspective because this is about a 15-year stretch of data. But that little wobble at the very top, where hopefully you can see it says October 5%, it's now 4.7%. Let me bring in the rest of the slide here. It's now 4.7%, but 4.7% is still relatively close to that high number. So we have not cured inflation, and we've been fighting it now. This is month 13 of what you can think of as a hard fight, but it's almost month 24 of relatively high prices in the United States. So what you can see in that shaded area are these red dots, and those red dots are the current forecast, the one we just saw on the first slide, going toward 2025 and 2026, where none of those red dots finally get back to that blue dotted line. That blue dotted line is where the Federal Reserve wants these data to be. So we had this beautiful period in the 2010s where it lingered below for the most part, and everybody thought that we had inflation nailed, and in fact since 1982, some of us may remember when mortgages were 14, 15% and inflation was relatively high. How many people paid a mortgage over 10% in their life? Okay, so I'll come back to that issue in a minute too, but that's when inflation last spiked. So we felt it over the last 40 years specifically, but really over the last 10 or 15, we had inflation nailed, and then we had a supply chain seizure as well as this huge demand stimulus simultaneously. And we're paying for that now. So we expect inflation to move through those red dots. What we'll see is how much they continue to raise interest rates, and we'll talk about this in just a second in 2023. So we're hearing a lot of rhetoric out of the Fed. I'm going to show you a couple of graphs that kind of explain that rhetoric in a minute, that we still have more rate increases to go. Whoa. So it's been, 2022 was amazing for this vertical climb in rates. What's that mean going forward? Housing markets also have to suffer as a result of what's happened. But you also got to think, and we'll come back and talk about housing right before the end, housing has to suffer just simply because people are going to be fatigued through demand. You knew this was coming. It's a matter now of how those things are going to now coalesce, higher interest rates, some demand concerns, just the higher prices in general. What's that mean for a slip? And we're already starting to see that slip in our housing markets. Again, that's another place of how far we got to go. We know those job losses are coming. What's that ultimately mean in terms of specific industries? We should expect that in tech, logistics, and in retail, that's where we're going to see the job losses most heavy. We've already had some in technology businesses. Thinking of our frontier technology businesses have already started shaving jobs. That is going to leach back into those directly related industries. And some of that's also related to commercial real estate utilization, which I'll talk about in a minute as we wrap up too. Okay, so that's the inflation picture. We expect it to continue to slide. A lot of it's because of this picture. The Federal Reserve every quarter takes a straw poll of its committee that makes the interest rate decisions called the Federal Open Market Committee. And they say, where do you think interest rates are going to be, excuse me, in terms of the ones we set over the next few years? You may not be able to see the numbers on this graph, but where the dots are kind of tell the story. That flat line of dots is the end of 2022, so they all agreed where they ended up in December, so that's pretty easy to do, right? We decided it's here, now we're here. That's the end of the year. But notice that the next set, moving left to right, is actually slightly above that. So that means interest rates are going to rise a little bit, maybe more in 2023, then finally peak and start sliding down. So this is where the Federal Reserve was in terms of those dots and that path going toward 2025 in about 15 months ago, okay? This is where they were 12 months ago. This is where they were 6 months ago. So the Federal Reserve has been chasing the data as the data have evolved. And they've said, well, now we have to continue to raise interest rates. All of that happened basically in 1 year. But all kind of moving toward the same path over time. Well, now, that red dot is where the Federal Reserve currently has our rates. And we're seeing that red arrow pointing toward where we should be going this year. And a lot of the issues are the following. One, we still have not seen true downturn in inflation, so the Federal Reserve remains concerned we have not cured the problem on the demand side yet. A lack of job losses is one signal of that. However, is it possible that if we start to go into recession in 2023, we'll actually see interest rates cut later in the year? There's some predictions out there, and the theory around how you should sort of manage these issues suggests that if we do go into recession, this now gives the Federal Reserve a little bit of area in which they could cut rates a little bit and give a little bit of a boost to the economy, kind of thread the needle. Because we're still in the pandemic shadow. And that's the real issue here in terms of how we're seeing interest rates managed at the national level and what that ultimately means for controlling inflation expectations. And that, folks, is the big deal. So no matter what you hear about wanting to get inflation pushed down, understanding you have to lose jobs as a result of that, What it really boils down to is how we're managing inflation expectations, because we don't make decisions about what inflation is today, we make decisions about where we see inflation going 12 or 24 months from now. So the Federal Reserve knows that, and that's what they're trying to do. What I want to show you in the next few slides are some of the forecast things that I watch in terms of saying, okay, if I see these things starting to turn down in unison, that means that things bad are coming. The first one is construction spending. So if you look over the last 32 years or so, that is the evolution after inflation, so inflation adjusted, of commercial real estate spending in terms of new construction. Okay, so you can see from 1990 where this starts, there was this slow path. In the 2000s, we saw a real decent pickup in commercial. Then we saw a slide during the Great Recession, and we saw kind of a wobbly movement toward the time of the pandemic, and then we saw a hard cut, and now it's slightly coming back. But here's residential in contrast. So residential is primarily the way that we spend on construction in the United States. And you can see that we had this basically unmitigated growth from 1994 to about 2006, and then a hard slide down, which we all know that story. Most of the pickup in the 2010s was multifamily, and we've seen a lot of growth over the last couple of years now in single family with the idea that demand was there. But it started to slide. You can see on the far right-hand side, that's actually turned down a little bit. Developers know with higher interest rates, higher prices, fatigue, and an unknown economy going forward, both geopolitically and just in general, why are you going to invest in that kind of an economy? So you have to assume that's going to slow down a little bit. So as that slows down, why I watch this as a forecast nugget, which I'll end up in just a second, I watch it because it means jobs are going to start to be lost, and then that's going to have a reverberative effect on other industries in the economy. Construction is one of those leading industries we watch as economists. Here's a look at interest rates. The main interest rate I watch is not just one interest rate, it's actually a spread. So I look at the difference between the 10-year Treasury and the 2-year Treasury yield, because in the way that we've studied these spreads, the 10 to 2-year spread has generally been the most prescient of a recession that's coming. So these are data from 1982 forward. The last 12 recessions since the Second World War, 10 of them have been preceded by this blue line slipping below zero for at least 3 months. Okay? So you can see on the very far right-hand side that blue line has slipped below the zero line, which is not as heavy as I wanted it, but you can see that it's been going down and has now slipped below that sort of signal line that we have to think about as an alarm. Now, why has it happened? If you push short rates up quickly, you know that spread is going to dive, and you can actually see for the last 12 months or so, it's been on just a dead sprint down. Okay? However, this is the Federal Reserve policy rate. So we are in unprecedented territory in terms of how that black line has moved basically vertically over the last 12 months, and we know we have to pay a price for that. So the second little piece of forecasting I'm watching is how those spreads, the difference really between what banks earn on new lending and what it costs them to generate new funds, or at least a proxy for those two, has been slipping closer to zero. And that's also going to make banks more nervous about lending over time, and that's another reason why we might see economic slowdown. The third, which is kind of a funny one, is called the jobless unemployment rate. You say, well, what do you mean jobless? Is when you're unemployed, you're jobless? No. And the answer is not quite. So the unemployment rate, the way it's measured, is kind of bifurcated into two pieces. Is ones that are new job losses and ones that are old job losses. And summed together is the unemployment rate we see in the paper. But the jobless, the ones in which we just see the new one, that's this one, and you can see that it's very, very low. So these data are from 1967 forward, and there's a ton of recessions. But the reason I'm showing you this is every recession since 1967 has been predicted, or has been preceded, by an uptick in this very specific way of measuring unemployment. And why that's important is because the last couple of months, this has ticked up. So watching the unemployment rate may not be as strong a signal as this one, which focuses very specifically on job losses that are new. Okay? So we're watching to see where that goes, and you can barely see, because it's been such a hot job market and we're at a very relatively low level of joblessness. You can see it just barely has ticked up, and you may not even be able to pick it out yet. But I'm telling you this is because if we do see job losses and we hear about more predictions of recession, it'll be because this is starting to move up in trend. Okay? So what's that mean? So my forecast nuggets at the national level of what to watch. Watch for investments in buildings, meaning watch how construction slows down, and if it slows down, what that means for other businesses that are related to construction, their demand forecasts, and what it means for how they hire. All of those pieces are in place. We already know that non-residential, or you can think of as commercial investment is slowing down, specifically in our urban areas in the United States, and we're watching how much longer that's going to last. On the interest rate spreads, I just said this, the whole point is how this may change the way banks think about lending and how much risk they're willing to take against the cost of funds as that starts to creep up. And we've already seen rate chasing a little bit happening out there, as we've seen, let's say, just deposit rates pick up a little bit to try to attract deposits. We've had this wild movement in deposits as well, where deposits spiked for a long time as we saw fiscal policy pay a lot of people. They put that money in the bank, and then as inflation has picked up and the economy started to slow down, those deposits are leaving. That also leaves banks and credit unions with more questions to answer about how they're going to originate new loans and where the money's going to come from. Now, it just so happens banks and credit unions generally have a lot of money sitting at the Federal Reserve. They may start draining that, but right now that money is paying more than what you could get on a new loan in terms of the risk you'd be taking. So banks and credit unions are going to be very reticent to start freeing up that money in terms of profit margins and what it means for depositors. Finally, like I said, these employment issues and watching what happens with the jobless rate, or what we think of as the so-called U2, not the U3, what we see in the paper. But let me tell you something else about what's going on in the labor market. We have seen a downturn that's been relatively sharp in terms of labor force participation rates. Will those folks come back? So one of the hopes in terms of our hot labor market is that as wages picked up, and we have very few, let's say, good possible hires out there, we would see people attracted to those higher wages and would come back out from whatever they were doing on the sidelines where they were not available. It could be because they had child care, dependent care, they went back to school, they retired for now, etc. There's a lot of different reasons we know drive people away from the labor force. Will they come back? If they don't come back, the cool thing about that is we have a relatively low unemployment rate that might linger for some time. However, it comes along with a lack of productivity. So we're watching that balancing act of will we get enough people back in the labor force, and how dependent was our national economy on immigration that has now slowed down in such a way that that labor force is not as available either. California is kind of the poster child for that issue. All right, so speaking of California, this is the same evolution. It took 72 months for the California economy to get through the Great Recession. It just finally broke back to the pre-pandemic level of aggregate hiring, or the total number of jobs in California, about 2 months ago, and it's kind of flattened out there. So we're watching how this goes. These are also seasonally adjusted jobs. As you can see, the sharp cut that took place during the pandemic time, and then this relatively trended positive movement since basically the beginning of 2021. But for California, it's not so important where we are in terms of aggregate employment, but where are the industries and where are they, how have they been hiring? Well, same basic picture in some ways as the national level, and I'm going to take you very quickly through this. This is April, May 2020. Every industry sector saw job cuts. And then as we move now to the latest data, which is November 2022, some industries have recovered, but not all. So in the last picture, we just got back to pre-pandemic levels of hiring. Well, the only way that's going to happen if some have grown, like transportation and warehousing, is if other ones have not quite recovered. So you can see in construction, we actually are up about 1.6%, but manufacturing is down a little bit, basically flat. If you look at the far right-hand side, which is again that same story I had before, leisure and hospitality jobs, bars, restaurants, event centers, those type of workers, including hotel workers in this case, down still about 5.5% in California, and that's after two relatively robust tourism periods in the last couple of summers in California. We have other services, which is this amalgam of other personal services, and then government, which is still down about 3.5%. A lot of that is in education, as we've seen a contraction of some school districts, and we've also seen retirements in government. We just have not seen hiring come back. But those three industries are the ones we're watching very closely in California, because in California there's a lot of lean toward those jobs, that if they don't come back and those job opportunities are not there, the productivity level, and ultimately what California is doing for residents, is going to be slower than it was pre-pandemic, and those business models may have changed. Your favorite restaurant, for example, may be doing fewer turns, have fewer tables, and be open fewer days of the week than it was pre-pandemic. That model may not change anytime soon. But you think about what that means when you aggregate across all restaurants in either Sonoma County, the North Bay, or California, that means a lower level of production, which means a lower level of tax revenue, and ultimately a lot of spending choices and some marginal issues that, for example, Selim Connolly is going to have to deal with in the next few weeks. So we'll see how that goes. This is Sonoma County. So Sonoma County is a microcosm of the North Bay's conundrum in the wake of the recession. This is just the post-recession time or post-pandemic time. I kind of watch it now since we're on the precipice maybe of another recession. The post-pandemic time. We have not gotten back to the aggregate level of hiring we were before the pandemic. We were almost there in late summer, and then it faded a little bit as we crept in toward the fall. Part of that's because we saw the economy starting to slow down. And so the Sonoma County economy, like the Napa County economy, like the Marin County economy, has not recovered the total number of workers yet. This is labor force. So let me go back one step. This is the number of people working, and I did the same thing with labor force, because that labor force issue to me is actually a more important issue than jobs. If we can't find workers, how are we going to have more jobs in the first place? So the labor force issue of it still being below where we were just about 3 years ago is a big deal if you think about how are we keeping our high school graduates around as potential workers? What are we doing with JC graduates as they're coming out of Santa Rosa Junior College? How are we doing with Sonoma State graduates? Are we generating job pipelines where those new workers are actually getting jobs, and are those jobs going to be there? So, and I'll come back and talk about this right at the end when I talk about population change. Here's Sonoma County's change. I'm just going to take us right to the punchline because I want to make sure we stay on time. Same basic deal as California. Most of the time, if you look at what's going on in the California economy, the Sonoma County economy moves very much in sync with the state of California, maybe 2 or 3 months behind it, historically speaking, basically since 1970. But most of the jobs had recovered in Sonoma County, but for a couple of big ones, which are information, which is basically tech. We've lost about 100 jobs out of 900, that's why that number's where it is. Finance has contracted a little bit, but government's down almost 10% in Sonoma County for now. Again, why is that happening? We've had contraction of school districts, so we've lost a little bit there. We've had people retire and not had rehired in those spaces. So all that combined has led to some downturn. However, if you look at Sonoma County's basically recovered relatively well. Construction and manufacturing have come back, which have been great. But watch construction specifically, and then watch what happens with manufacturing, something I'll come back to in about 5 minutes at the very end, is that will we see a place like Sonoma County take advantage of what we're hearing at the national level is this nouveau thinking about repatriating manufacturing from other parts of the world to be more resilient here in the United States, and whether or not that actually takes hold, and whether or not Sonoma County is a place that can attract those kind of businesses. Biggest emphasis probably this year is going to be on housing. So I want to show you this. This is housing prices over the last 12 months in growth. So those blue columns are all above the red dotted line, which is at 0, except for San Francisco County in California. Every county of California saw an increase over the last 12 months in terms of real estate prices at the median. Not a shocker. That's the last 12 months. This is the last 24. So for the last 24, we still have relatively unprecedented growth, but let me tell you something. While that might look shocking to you, if you look at the last 36 is adding another 10 or 15% on almost every single one of those columns. So we have been in a not unprecedented, but a really strong housing run for most of California. San Francisco kind of being a weird anomaly based on, and again, no kidding, based on the job market there and the diaspora that's taken place as a result of what happened with the pandemic. Listing prices have not quite given way, so there's still a lot of confidence in folks that are putting their houses up, even though we're starting to see a slowdown in the growth of median housing prices. Only a few counties in California right now have actually a downturn from 12 months ago in terms of listing prices. But if you look at listing prices 3 or 4 months ago, about 55 of the 58 California counties have seen a drop in listing prices. So I tend to look at 12-month rolling windows rather than 2 or 3 months, because 2 or 3 months are good headline makers, but they're not very good for economics. So we're watching this closely. When these all start to slip towards 0, you got to expect there's going to be some pain in housing markets. This is the forecast, and this is why you're hearing about that pain. So listing prices have not come back yet, but the forecast looking forward 12 months is basically going negative across the board in California. This is meant to be every county in California. California down 2.7% looking forward toward the end of this year. Imperial County, Kings County, places that are still seeing outmigration from the urban areas in Southern California and thus still seeing housing demand, but that's going to start to fade too. So we have to expect that the mix of higher interest rates, relatively strong price growth, a lack of available units, and potentially job loss are all going to contribute to a slowdown in what people are willing to pay for single-family homes. Okay, you have to assume that's true. Now, if we look at this slide, which you may not be able to see, I'm going to try to explain it to you. This is looking at Sonoma County, Napa County, Marin County growth of wages across occupations, and then California on state average. In that box is Sonoma County. Every single number from March 2020 to March 2022, the latest data for March 2022, is positive. We've seen wage growth across the board. Napa and Marin counties have not seen wage growth across the board. They've actually seen some where wages have contracted. But Sonoma County's seen wages go up across the board. And the first thing you might say is, hey, that's good, because housing prices have gone up. So you want wages to kind of stay in step with what would be a key piece of the cost of living. Okay? Now, let's go back, sorry, I went too fast. What's the biggest problem with that? If you're a small business and those wages have gone up, those wages, even if inflation sags, even if job losses take place, are not going back. So this is, in a sense, a semi, if not completely permanent change in the cost of doing business, depending on the types of occupations you hire. And guess what's at the very top? Food preparation and service related. Basically your restaurant and bar workers and event center workers. Community and social services has gone up. So nonprofits have seen wages rise. They had to, just to attract those workers. And then a bunch of engineering and healthcare practitioners. So all that has picked up, it's not going back, and generally speaking that's true statewide. What's that mean for rental prices? Well, if I look at rental prices in November 2019, we've seen, this is 1 year ago. So rental prices have kind of crept up somewhere between 5 and 7% across California. This is what's happened since November 2019. So if you look at Santa Barbara County, for example, rent at the median has gone up about 42%, 3 years, okay? But notice that that's not shockingly different than about 15 other counties. Sonoma County, which I can't, unfortunately, the laser I don't think is gonna work against that screen. I should know better technologically on that one. Sonoma County's gone up about 18% in rent, 3 years. Now let's go back one slide. Median wages have gone up 12%, okay? Median rents have gone up 17.7, okay? So what's that mean for your worker earning 25 bucks an hour and their ability to stay in their rental, right? This will be the #1 gavel-banging, fist-banging, Monday, Tuesday night theater in city councils and board supervisors for probably at least the next 18 months. It'll be #1 issue, okay? So watch for that to continue to come up. I watch commercial real estate also because we've had a real wild change in commercial real estate. I happen to look at Cushman Wakefield, I also look at Newmark. The summary is the following, and this is not much different no matter which one you're looking at in terms of the research teams that are out there. Office, retail are going to have tough years in 2023. You may see some final choices made across a bunch of different angles, meaning urban office space utilization, urban retail and restaurant connected to that urban office. And always remember, there are secondary and tertiary rings around major urban office spaces that feed off of those inbound commuters. If those inbound commuters are coming back at 65 or 70% of pre-pandemic levels, I might have been able to hold on in the short term, but the long term is now starting to show its face. So we're watching closely on that, but industrial is still going to be pretty strong. And so at least for this year, the forecast is pretty good for industrial, but that's because there's a lack of space, and most of the construction is happening there because the demand remains in that space. Let's end up talking about population change. Some data just came out 2 weeks ago from Census, and it looked at only at the state level through the end of June 2022. Well, let me walk you through one at a time. This is births across the states of the United States. Here's folks that have passed on. Here's international migration, and these are ordered, as you're going to see in a minute, from states that had the largest growth from April 2020. Well, basically from June 2020 to June 2022, okay? So the ones on the left-hand side are Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. The ones on the far right are Massachusetts, Ohio, Michigan, Louisiana, Illinois, California, New York, okay? Now, watch what happens on this one. First 3 columns were in order. Births, deaths, international inbound migration in net. Now it's domestic migration. Now look at Texas and Florida. That black column are the inbounds from other states in the United States to those states. The black columns on the far right-hand side, California and New York, are below the red dotted line, which means those are outbounds to other states from California and New York, okay? Alaska is the pivot point between the growth states and those that lost population. Alaska had positive 346 people over that 2-year period, okay? Moved to the Great White North, so to speak. California lost about 500,000 people, which isn't that big of a deal, but it's the first time in recorded history that California has lost population. And New York actually lost more people with a smaller state population, so a larger percentage. Texas gained about 900,000 people in 2 years. Relatively large state, so again, it's not a big deal, but one of the biggest puzzles to solve is, who did they get, and who did we lose? Okay? Now, how many of y'all, I say that almost kind of tongue-in-cheek, how many of y'all know somebody that's moved to Texas, or Tennessee, or North Carolina? Yeah, I mean, that's basically the anecdote. So, we don't have any clue about that just yet. The economists are trying to find that sort of holy grail out there. What data set's going to tell me who moved, where they moved, what they do? We don't know that yet with any precision, so don't look for it. What population change might mean is the loss of K through 12 attendance. So we go back to that labor force issue. Where are we going to get new high school graduates? These are the counties of California. California is expected to lose about 9% of its K through 12 attendees from the 2021 academic year to the 2030-31 academic year. That's the latest prediction coming out of the Department of Finance given the census prediction and their own demographic models. Sonoma County is predicted, which you might be able to see at the far right-hand side, it's actually, you're not going to be able to see in the back, 17% down over the next 8-9 years. Why? California's lost population the last Sonoma County's lost population the last 5 years in a row, so is Napa, so is Marin, okay? And we've also aged. Marin County is 47.1 years old at the median. 5 years older than Sonoma County, 7 years older than every other county except for Sonoma and Napa that has at least 250,000 people in it in California. Okay? Minimum 5 years older than Marin. So what does that mean? Well, as you age, you tend to replicate at a slower speed. So that means we're going to have fewer kids, okay, in school. What that means is not an issue now in labor force, but an issue later. And as we age, we also don't have those people coming in necessarily as workers. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. So let me say 2 things to kind of give you a sense of where I see 2023 and perhaps through 2025. One is that we are going to go through an economic slowdown. Whether or not we have a declared recession by the National Bureau of Economic Research is an unknown right now. We had 2 quarters of negative GDP in early 2022. We didn't have a declaration because the labor market remained relatively strong. We didn't have the sort of mix of components that lead to a declaration of recession. Number one thing to remember, don't worry about a declaration of recession. Think about, is the economy slowing down in such a way that it means some stagnation is coming regardless of how we label it? And the second thing is that we have to pay the penalty for what we've done in the last 2 years in terms of pulling us out of the turnoff of the economy in the pandemic. We knew this penalty was coming. It's really just a matter of one on the other side of this. Do we go back to something that's more pre-pandemic, or do we have structural shocks in our economy that are going to change fundamentally the way certain industries work? Those are the 2 things I'm concerned about and watching very closely as I've watched the evolution. But expect 2023 to be a slower year. Inflation will continue to come down. Interest rates are not going to come back down anytime soon, but assume by late 2023, 2024, we'll start to see a slow slide back in rates. And other than that, we're just going to be kind of on this turbulent ride in kind of an apropos way where it's going to be a little bit stormy here for the next 12 or 15 months. But are there opportunities? I think for Sonoma County, there's opportunities in manufacturing, in energy technology, and being on the front end of the science on that. Construction is going to remain in place. We have large so-called regional housing need allocation numbers in terms of Sonoma County. We are supposedly got to build a lot of housing units. In what form are they going to come, and where are they going to go, and how much theater on Monday and Tuesday nights are going to come along with it? So Mark Staff, who just got on City Council in Santa Rosa, he's going to have a lot of this going on during his first term. We will see how that goes. And tourism. Tourism, folks, the funny thing about it is we might have a slowing economy, but that's really a nice gauge of how slow it is. We might have an actual positive boost in Napa, Marin, and Sonoma counties with tourism as people who have wealth in this region say, I don't want to take a big trip, and I want to kind of curb how much I'm spending, so I'm going to drive to Sonoma, Napa, and Marin instead. So we may actually see kind of a weird, decent year in tourism, even if the rest of the economy is slowing down here, but we need to stay competitive, and that's the key. That competition is not going away and just going up. Some of the challenges, things I talked about. What's going to happen with those job opportunities? Commercial real estate utilization and what happens on the other side of that. Wage growth, inflation expectations, and the housing and population debates to come. If there's any fate that from a leadership standpoint Sonoma County has facing it, it'll be housing from now until as far as the eye can see. Okay? So folks, with that, that's what I've got for today. And if we have time for questions, I'll take it. Thank you again so much for having me, and thank you, Jan. Who's got a question out there?
Robert, I have a question.
Yes.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
You made reference to the strong labor market being the reason that we were not categorized as being in a recession. So I'm curious as to when the definition of 2 successive quarters, negative GDP numbers, when did the definition change, number one? And number two, talking about a strong labor market, there are a lot of people that live in California and elsewhere in the country who earn more money not working than working. So what effect does that have on it?
Two great questions. So the first one's a lot easier. The textbook definition of recession is not how economists think about recession. It's what you hear in textbooks, and then normally economists will turn around and say, well, hold on a minute. The way we actually declare recession is a little bit more nuanced than that. So you usually have to have a mix of 3 major items. Is one, you have to have industrial production or some kind of capacity utilization measure slipping at the same time. GDP after inflation is slipping at the same time you're losing jobs. All 3 of those have to mix together to have a recession declared. They usually have to mix together for at least 2 quarters in a row. Sometimes it's more like 3. So when we saw, what you may have seen on some of the slides, we had this very, very skinny recession declared in 2020 because there was such a contraction of all those at one time. You kind of had to declare recession, but it only lasted 2 months. Shortest recession on record. So it's the mix of data that leads to that outcome. In terms of how people are paid, this is another one of these issues we've been waiting to see as economists. So in the end of the federal fiscal year in September, which kind of just really ended in December because of the way they figured out the omnibus bill, but when it ended in September, some of the original augmentation of the aid that came as a result of the pandemic finally faded once and for all. So we may see some of those getting paid more for not working effects start to fade a little bit. But there's no doubt about the fact that probably slowed down some migration back into the labor force or looking for a job in earnest from basically the period between June 2020 and June 2022. There's no doubt about that. But that change led to a wage increase in an attempt to try to attract people back out from that payment, and those wage payments are probably here to stay. So that's that lingering sort of permanent change we got to watch very closely, especially for small business formation.
So you didn't mention federal deficit spending as a cause of inflation. What's going on there?
So we have seen, thank you. So the question was about federal deficit spending. We have seen spending fade for now. Even if you hear things like the Inflation Reduction Act and $1.1 trillion or $1.1 trillion being spent, that's not all going to get spent in 2023. That's going to get spent over years. So you've actually seen a fade in spending in the short term because of how much we saw an increase in 20 and 2021. The biggest problem now is how much of our debt was refinanced in such a way while interest rates are relatively low to reduce that interest payment, which is one of the key drivers in how much the deficit pains us in terms of the total debt it creates as we linger on in time. For right now, we're seeing the current forecast relatively flat, but much higher than it was 3 years ago, going toward the end of this decade. And some of that will be the IRA, but the IRA spending is going to be spread over a long period of time.
You mentioned supply side, inflation, and demand side. How much of the supply side do you think has caused the total number?
So most of the research on this suggests that it's been about 60-40 at its peak, and that's now faded back to maybe more like 80-20. So it's 80% demand and 20% supply chain related, but at its peak it might have been 60-40. And we usually think it's about 95-5 demand to supply. So that's the puzzle that was very tricky to solve, and that's why we haven't seen inflation fade as fast as we would think it would have with interest rates rising as fast as they did. If the supply chain issues remain in place, you're not going to see much of a fade. And it also kind of goes back to wages. How much are wages and their changes going to keep inflation from being able to slip back to where it was before the pandemic?
Also, how does energy play into that?
Energy is more of a supply side issue than the demand side issue, but it does play on both sides of the ball. So if energy prices remain relatively elevated, we're going to see the supply side of our economy want to pass some of that through. And then on the demand side, whether or not we're willing to spend as much. The supposition is that might lead to an energy race or some innovation that makes us less dependent on energy markets and maybe more self-sufficient or at least regionally sufficient. We'll see if that plays out, but that's still probably at least 7 or 10 years away.
Our last question.
On the housing front here in Sonoma County, do you think there's any sort of imbalance from like the rental market versus single family and how that might play out in the near future?
Can you define what you mean by imbalance?
You know, the mix between what's going up, what's being constructed.
Oh, sorry, sure. Yeah, so this will be one of the biggest issues is whether or not we see some threading of the needle between we know that we have a want for multifamily, we know we have some want for single family, but in what form should single family come in such a way can we put more units in the same space? And are people going to want to demand those units? And this debate has been going on for 10 or 12 years now in Sonoma County and really kind of regionally and beyond regionally in California or throughout California, is that are people going to want to have the classic sort of 2,000 square foot, 3 and 2 postage stamp subdivision single family home, or are they going to be willing to live more like something closer to multifamily because they may see themselves as utilizing something they buy similar to something they would rent. They're not going to be there for 10 or 15 years, so why do they care if they live in 1,300 square feet with a common wall? We have not rectified, or we haven't answered that debate yet in Sonoma County, and I think we're still worrying about it a lot. So we'll see. But there's no doubt about the fact that as push comes to shove, as we creep closer to 2031 and we need to put a certain number of units up, you're going to see municipalities very tempted to put up multifamily simply to jump over that hurdle under the supposition that if you build it, they will come. We'll see if that actually plays in a place like Sonoma County, because there's no doubt about the fact that, folks, your housing mix does play into your jobs mix, especially on the higher end. And some of y'all who hire medical professionals, financial professionals, C-suite style workers, the first thing they're thinking about is where am I going to live and is that really where I want to be 10 or 15 years? So the housing mix and how it evolves is a major issue that bleeds back into economic development as much as workforce development. Oh, thank you so much, folks.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much, Rob. That was really enlightening. I wanted to also thank everybody for staying a couple of extra minutes. We wanted to acknowledge our elected officials, Assemblyman David Conley, David Hagley, Vice Mayor of Healdsburg, Mark Stepps, Santa Rosa City Council, and Steve Click, Sonoma County Fire District Board. So thank you everybody for coming. Put on your calendar February 1st for our next general membership meeting when we will be having a presentation on post-pandemic marketing. And one more quick announcement. Eddie's being sworn in as sheriff today at 11 o'clock at the Luther Burbank Center. Okay.